Yeah.
Jackson said,
That's
one of your neighbors.
That is, that's what
I
gets.
don't know that name. I live right next to a guy named Artie. Yeah, white pickup.
They had it so nice at my university where
He's a caretaker.
they allowed you for 5 years to work 1/3 time at the university. Indeed salary. Time was money.
Doesn't,
And it just allowed you to phase out.
I'm actually,
so
no, let's not ask. I'm that one.
Wow.
Yeah.
So then after
Yeah, it's
that.
on the other end. Hey.
I've been offered to phase out the okay.
It's on the other side of the block.
In Brookfield for the university, they would hire somebody full time at half your Indian salary.
Sharing
Oh,
all the
wow.
chatter.
Get a third wheel because that's just the way.
One of
seniority
us.
works.
There's a. That would be a lot of fun. No, I think. Go-kart.
yeah, around the block.
Cause there's that. Coming off of Dock Allen, on the north end, there's that big hill. That's a fun one.
I had never roller skated outside of roller skating rink, and I was like, oh, I'll go here, and I just started going down that hill. I mean, I was terrified. I've never gone so fast on roller skates.
Hello, hello, testing.
You're working.
Perfect. I can't see any of you though.
Oh, we don't.
So we just have to, one of us has to start video, one of you. I think maybe Mikel.
We're gonna start video.
All right. Cool. So I was in back in Denver for a family event and had some technical difficulties getting home in time. So I am in a booth in a co-working place in Denver trying to keep my signal, which has been a little iffy today. So we're going to see how this fares. Who do we have in the room?
Well, we just read your email, Emily. This is Jerry, and Obi is here, and I think he's agreed to be drafted to facilitate.
Perfect. Do we have other folks in the room? Do we have a quorum?
Yes, we have a quorum.
We have Tony, Maketa,
Good.
Aaron, and Steve.
And Steve just walked in, so we're full on.
Okay. Well, I'm going to hope that my connection stays. If for whatever reason I drop, I will join as soon as I can from my phone. And OB, I'm going to let you take it away as the chair of the evening.
Okay, well, it looks like it's the right time to start also. So I'm going to call this meeting with Planning Commission to order at 4:30. And first item is citizens to be heard if there are any. You may want to raise your hand on if you're online or just interrupt us. I'm going to take that as no citizens to be heard. Next item is any ex parte communications or disclosures that anyone wants to make.
Seems like it might just be an update, but for the HDHO, I'm the part owner in an HDHO development.
So Steve made his regular disclosure. And I guess next item is approval of the minutes.
I'll move to approve the minutes from July 10th, 2023, of the regular planning commission meeting.
Second.
And I have, if I can get there, a correction. In the minutes, it refers to the board. Is it talking about the county commission? So it will do things like send a favorable recommendation to the board. And it does it 3 or 4 times.
Okay,
One time it's the board, so it just should be the county commission.
yeah, okay, we'll get that
Well, we
corrected.
need better help. don't we?
I also think too that there, sorry, I'm just pulling mine up. It's towards the top where it says it. I think it's probably passing the minutes from the previous meeting. It said there's a 3-0 vote. I abstained. And I don't think a 3-0 passes.
It wouldn't.
We would need a 4 vote for a majority.
And it's somewhere up at the top there, huh?
That does seem,
We,
Oh, yeah, there's 3 votes in favor for the approval of the minutes. Now I'm wondering if somebody just abstained on that, but that's interesting.
Because I think there's only 4 of us present. I abstained.
You
I
abstained,
wasn't at that meeting and I didn't review it.
yes.
but we did have a quorum otherwise of in attendance. There was, Emily was there, Aaron.
No, I believe and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that like your majority of the vote, it needs to be 4. It's
Oh,
ba-
yeah,
it's
for
based-
For
so
sure.
there's
I'm
only-
I'm just thinking that maybe the number 3 was wrong because who would have not voted except for you, Steve?
I don't think
Um,
McKetta had joined that meeting yet.
So Emily, Aaron.
Because we only noted 2 absent. So we should probably go back and check that.
we should go back and check. And I would love to check that on the bylaws, because for things like a public hearing, a quorum, we need to have a majority present and voting in our bylaws. I mean, we can go ahead and reapprove them tonight, but I'm not sure we need to have the full majority for minutes. I don't know. We should just double check that, ye old Roberts rules.
So I think where we probably are is we've got some corrections to the minutes we've got.
I will amend my motion to figure out the rules and vote on it next time. What do we want to do?
We can vote now.
Okay.
And this is just regarding the previous minutes,
Right, okay. I was just trying to figure out the date for those minutes.
26.
Thank you. I'll move to approve both the minutes from July 26th and August 10th. As amended
As amended.
by Bob.
July 10, June 26 and July.
Right,
Right,
okay,
second.
thank you.
Great. Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
And opposed, of course, no one. Great,
I'll just abstain since I
and you're abstaining,
no comment on them
okay.
previously.
And let's see, whoops. I'm sorry, but I've actually got this in this regular sheet. Don't I? Okay. Okay, so we have presentations, county updates. That's Trish.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to be a lot of help. I actually wasn't at the last county commission meeting on the 1st. Is that correct? Sorry, I was up at a ranch. I'm trying to get a ranch in the Book Cliffs into a conservation easement. So I was working on that. I mean, I'm happy to go over that meeting, but Elisa was there, and I mean, I guess, I watched it on YouTube, and kind of interestingly enough, and Emily and Elisa, you guys are welcome to jump in at any time, but the ADO all of a sudden turned to the conversation about workforce housing. And we started getting a lot of pushback on that, and this in the sense that it's not really articulated in the ordinance, and specifically from a couple commissioners. And yeah, I don't really know what to say about that. And Emily, do you want to add anything?
So I went back and watched all of the YouTube videos and workshops from that entire, it was basically June of last year on 1.5 speed. It was June of last year until I think the final vote was like November, sometime in November. The timeline, and I went back and I looked at all the packets as well and was trying to track the track changes to see when that adjustment happened. So when the Planning Commission, and there were some workshops kind of as interceding here, but the Planning Commission, I'm not gonna remember the exact dates, but sometime in August, we sent our recommendation forward. And during the course of that discussion, we had added language that would have required, we knew that oversight was going to be difficult due to the fact that these were all rentals. And, with a purchase, you have the, transfer of the title, but with a rental, to have HASU be checking every single 60 days was deemed by the county at the time to be not something that was viable. But what the Planning Commission had inserted in was language that would have shifted the burden onto the owner or operator of these ADOs to maintain a log that could be audited. And you actually see references of that still even in the code today and in the drafts that went through county commission. So like there's this scent of this sometime between when the Planning Commission also included the language that it needed to be for residents or members of the local workforce. And there were allusions over the course of the conversation. I think Steve had the exact quote of, well, the county commission hasn't quite figured out how they want to manage this, but we know that they want to move this forward. So we're going to, get this forward and over to them, and then they'll take it the last way. I'm paraphrasing Steve, but that was sort of, I think, a good summation. Sometime between when it went from the Planning Commission recommendation to the county commission, quite a bit of the draft changed. And what I'm not certain is the process of that. I know there were some workshops and that there were people working with county staff. Regardless, by the time it hit the next workshop, that language was gone, and it was still sort of referenced, but this idea of auditing was struck from the draft. The county commission had a public hearing on this, and then at that initial meeting, they decided they needed to have another workshop in order to make sure that there was consensus about, at this point, the major issue was how many units should be included in this pilot. And there was concern about enforcement of overnight rentals, but there was never a major emphasis on how do we ensure that this is being that the residents are members of the workforce. That kind of left the conversation, and it instead became this enforcement issue. There was a lot of concern that this could potentially incentivize or make it harder to enforce illegal nightly rentals. And so that was what dominated the conversation. And in the final 5 minutes of the county commission's conversation in the public meeting where they took the vote, Commissioner Stock at the time raised some concerns about the fact that we had, and pretty directly called out, we've lost this language around the local workforce. And there was a little bit of back and forth, but the gist was that for reasons that I'm not entirely sure, it was determined that was, the intent was there, but that the enforcement, the teeth of enforcement wouldn't be. This is also the place in the code where the Planning Commission recommended a $30,000 fine per night for people who violated this. And we had many developers of potential ADOs at that meeting where that was discussed who were like, yeah, do it. So, we ended up with this $10,000 fine. So it's like the teeth of enforcement are there, but it's not, they're not tied to the thing. So that's That's my reading of it. Like the intent was there. It was the enforcement question. And because it was deemed that this couldn't be enforced through the means that we're enforcing workforce requirements for like ADUs or H2HO, sort of, it's very fuzzy. So I hope that
Yeah.
that's helpful to everybody to kind of get that recap.
Thank you, Emily. If you don't mind, Trish, if I could just expand a little bit too on my reading of it. Recall at the commission meeting on the 1st that we did talk about it, and Commissioner Walker remembered the same way that I remembered. It was like the impetus for removing that occupancy requirement was sort of like this idea that we were going to try to streamline this program and not bog it down with a bunch of red tape and having to qualify all of the occupants over time and all the admin time that would require. And so I think everybody was thinking, well, these are just going to be used naturally for local workforce. What's the big deal? And they can't be used for nightly rentals, because we can definitely enforce that. So it was kind of like, well, what other user type didn't really get brought up, but now it's getting brought up that people are concerned that some of these ADO sites would be open to snowbirds and very wealthy RV, lifers that might be, looking for a place to park their huge, $1 million RV, and that would take away from the sites being used for local employees that wouldn't otherwise be able to afford it. So I don't think that was never really a concern that got brought up at the time we were developing the code. So, now we're kind of looking back and seeing if there's a possibility legally, and we'll be discussing this at tomorrow's commission meeting, of how to put something back into the occupancy requirements that would require the manager or the operator to keep a log of their tenants and to prove that they have local employment through either a pay stub or a letter from their employer, and that the county would be able to audit those randomly. And so that's something we're going to be looking at trying to figure out tomorrow.
And I would specifically look, so in going back and watching these YouTube recordings, in the meeting where the planning commission sent our recommendation forward, Steve actually explicitly asked that question of would we, and I think Steve had suggested a possibility of exploring that possibility of allowing snowboards, and the planning commission consensus was no, that was not the intent. So like that specific example was explicitly raised, and the planning commission discussion concluded that even though there could be some potential cost abatement if most of your residents in the workforce are here in the summer, snowbirds could help cover the cost in the winter. The planning commission concluded that that was not the intent behind what we understood the ordinance to be, being proposed for, and opted to not include that possibility and maintain that language specific to workforce and locals, with the sort of specific definition to be determined by the county commission and staff as they continued that exploration. So I know that at least when it left this body, that specific use case was explicitly out of the realm of what we were considering in our recommendation. And I can get the exact date, but it was that meeting in August that we were talking about it. And then in the meeting in the first public hearing, which would have occurred in October at the county commission, when then there was the second workshop before it came back to a vote, the county attorney at the time was speaking about enforcement issues. And that is where I heard the conversation shift. And it was not about, at least from the perspective of the county attorney in interpreting the ordinance, it was not that the intent for who might reside in these units might change, or even so much like kind of not worrying about it, but that enforcement was the concern. And because it would likely enforce itself due to the nature of just the sites and who is likely to reside in them. But again, when you read the code as it's written and what was actually adopted and in the land use code, you continue to see references back to 4.9.4, which is where the planning commission had explicitly said we, recommended that auditing to ensure that folks were locals or members of the workforce. And so there is this weird sense, and I just don't know where it was where it was lost.
Right, right.
Yeah, so
Trish, do you have more to say?
Not really, no, that's just great to kind of revisit those conversations so that when we discuss this tomorrow night, we can dive into that.
It is interesting, somebody, in an email, that was, on Mappin, just mentioned that, their reading of it, the way it stands, it might require you to be resident or workforce kind of argument, just from the way that person going and reading it. I didn't go back and read it then again, but it's interesting.
Mhm. Yeah, so it's
Okay,
definitely one of those reasons why the whole thing where it got brought up, I think, is a bunch of. We have what, 4 or 5 ADO applications that are being heard at tomorrow's commission meeting. There's some opposition to some of those, and one of the reasons that they're bringing up that they're in opposition is that there's no guarantee that the sites will be used for employees, so.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I mean, I'm eager to see where the conversation goes. Of the ADO applications that have already been approved, 2 of them, at least, the one currently located at the Contractor's Roost and then the one at the Swamp, those people who are developing those were involved in the full process, and my expectation is explicitly understood this to be for locals and workforce. They were the ones advocating for the fines if that wasn't followed. I can't recall the specific properties that were also approved, but I mean, a simple check-in with them and say, was this your intent all along? If everyone's on the same page, maybe we're not in that rough of a spot, but anyway, eager to see where it goes.
So that's about it for me, OB.
okay, department updates, code enforcement.
yeah, so y'all might have heard, we lost Josh. He took another job with Grand Water and Sewer. So he is happily has started in his new position. We were sad to see him go. He did an amazing job at code enforcement. And so we're kind of in this little interim period where we're kind of revising and looking again at the job description and making sure that it's kind of up to date on what the actual position entails, and if there's anything that we need to add to the position or take away. So that's happening right now, and then I think within probably the next couple of weeks, we'll have that posted online for recruiting that position. And for a minute there was talk of possibly moving the position to some other department, like maybe it would be helpful for it to be under the attorney's office or whatnot, but it was decided that it should really just remain with planning and zoning and building, so we'll still be housing that position under our department. And then we are going to be looking like the timeline for moving into our new building is going to be like the last week of August. We should be moved in. So just a heads up to everybody that if you're looking for us, we'll be at that new building, and we're going to have some stuff on our website that will just direct people on how to get there, because the entrance is a little funky from that side of the street. And yeah, we'll just have that information up on our website, so it's easy for everybody to see. And then we did have Arvista Noel. She her last day was last week on Friday, so she's moved on. She flew the coop of planning and zoning, but she's happily started a new position as well, and so she's still in town, but she's going to be serving on the housing task force going forward. You'll probably see her at one of your meetings coming up for the affordable housing master plan that she had a huge role in, and then she's going to, as her role on the housing task force, she's going to continue to see that through until it finally gets adopted. And then we are going to be welcoming a new Vista coming. Technically, she's not here physically yet. That will be in like September, but she's already started working kind of remotely and getting up to speed on her new role. And basically, she's going to be looking at taking the results and the goals that came out of the affordable housing master plan update and figuring out, ways that we can include those indicators up on our website and methods for tracking affordable housing progress in the county. So that's one of her, her objectives. The other objective that she's gonna probably be working on within the 2024 timeframe would be the possibility of an update to the active transportation master plan with the trails division. So that's also, hopefully she'll be able to get some experience on that. That's our department updates. And yeah, we're moving right along. We feel a little bit lonely in our office right now because we've lost 2 people, but we'll
Just
get
make the Vista person the code enforcement. Throw 'em right in there.
Carry a big stick.
Send them to Thompson.
Okay, we're moving on to general business, action items, discussions and considerations of approval and the discussion items. I think Lisa starts this one.
Yeah, so this is just to give you guys an update on the last couple of land use code amendments that were going through the commission. So we had on August 1st, the commission voted on the planned unit development density bonus amendment. They were looking closely at the reason for having the MFR zone, or really kind of the implication of including the MFR zone as an eligible zoning district for a density bonus. And ultimately, without having more information about some of those parcels that were zoned MFR, they decided to strike that language in the PUD density bonus so that MFR zones are not eligible with this revised version that was approved. So right now you can get a density bonus, or you can apply for a density bonus through their PUD overlay section for large lot residential and small lot residential, but those are the only 2. And this would mean that people could apply for it for the workforce housing incentive instead of an affordable housing incentive. So it's kind of offering a second alternative to a density bonus. So we'll see if any property owners get, excited about that. I think we should probably have something up on our website that kind of promotes this new change and possibility for property owners and developers if they want to opt into that. We also, at the last commission meeting, there was a public hearing open for the land use code amendment to Article 5 lot design standards, which the planning commission sent a favorable recommendation for this land use code update, but with the revision of adding back in a project boundary buffer would be required for subdivisions that are 20 lots or more. And at the commission meeting, there was quite an intensive discussion around that and why, what really was the intent of the buffer requirement in the first place. And we kind of got a little bit more insight into that from one of the commissioners. And after having that clarity, it was kind of advised that staff revise this requirement even further and actually go back to what they thought the intent was, which was to buffer between subdivisions that are higher density going into lower density areas. And right now, the language in that project boundary buffer section is very confusing, and it almost would imply that like a subdivision in rural residential would require a buffer if it was going into next to like a small lot, higher density zoning district, which doesn't make any sense. And so it really should have been defined and clarified that it was for, higher dense developments, subdivisions going in where there might be adjacent lower density zoning. And so that was the change that was made, and that's going to be on the commission's agenda tomorrow for a final vote. We also did clarify that there's still a threshold for the size, which is at 5 5 lots or more. So that way, it still allows for the infill possibilities, even if you're in next to it, a lower dense zoning district. If you're just subdividing 4 lots or less, then you don't have to have that buffer requirement. So it allows for the infill possibilities still. So yeah, if you do have any, comments or concerns about that, I would probably reach out to the commissioner or attend the meeting tomorrow and provide your insights at the meeting. Yeah, and so that,
Has there been really any public input on that?
no, we didn't get any public comments
Yeah.
submitted, so. Yeah, I don't know.
I just have a comment about, let's see, what page is it on? I have no idea. 4.4.10 at the very start. And it's just a language thing. I guess it's page 11 of the packet.
Is that open space density bonus?
The density bonus of up to 20%. So it's, yes, open, exactly. And I would say that sentence sounds like the planning commission makes the decision. And I don't think that's probably what's intended. So it says a density bonus of up to 20% may be approved at the recommendation of the planning commission for projects providing 20% or more open space. That makes it sound like we make the decision. So
think
wouldn't
it's-
it be the county commission with the county commission's approval?
I understand what you mean, Bob, and I think it's maybe like 20% may be referred at the recommendation of the planning commission. Approval doesn't happen in this body.
Right,
At the
It's what he's-
recommendation, yeah.
Yeah, approving at the recommendation, well, are we approving it or recommending it?
Mhm.
That is a bit
yes,
paradoxical.
might say may be recommended
Yeah.
by the planning commission for projects.
Referred at the discretion of the planning commission.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, I see what you're saying. The word approved makes it
yeah,
confusing there, yeah. Yeah, okay. That could, we could definitely look at clarifying
Yeah.
that language. It's not substantive, a substantive change, so I think it'd be fine to do that at the meeting tomorrow. That's a good catch.
Yeah, and is there another area in the land use code that has a similar structure to it that we can take that language from?
This one is kind of weird because I think back in the day, it used to be that the planning commission would have more of a role in approving. Well, if it's a PUD though, it does come to planning commission because it's a rezone. So. Yeah, I guess that does kind of make sense that the planning commission definitely has some power, authority or whatever, but yeah, I think that should just be clarified. Yeah.
I was wondering on that, like, anytime we, with this boundary thing, anytime we give more density, I mean, would that be an excuse to like restrict it to affordable housing? Like, oh, you get one more spot on here, but it's gotta be.
Well, yeah,
AE.
that's the idea of a density bonus for sure. The project boundary buffer,
But that's what I'm saying with the boundary
the
buffer.
boundary buffer is only required when there's a subdivision being proposed.
Yeah,
And
so
so we
you
would
get
never
your-
give away density in a subdivision. Like, right now, you can apply, like, where this would probably apply is like in, say, a subdivision was being proposed as just a use by right, what the underlying zoning allowed was in small lot residential, they allow a 1/4 acre lots, that's already there.
Yeah.
We can't require affordable housing for just the use by right.
Mhm.
If we were increasing the density, increasing density, we would require something out of that. We don't. The
But
PUD
I'm
section
trying
does
to
that.
like finagle the boundaries of that and then
We're-
like to get in for the infill or now.
Well, if there was an infill project that would. Yeah, I mean, there's just so many different scenarios where you could apply this, but essentially, we don't have any. We don't give away affordable, we don't give away density
Right,
right now, except for in the PUD section.
right. So that buffer zone's not giving away an extra
No,
lot.
it's not doing anything to give away density. It's just saying, if perhaps you have a subdivision in small lot residential and it happens to be adjacent to rural residential, because we do have some
Yeah.
areas like that where it's just right up against next to rural residential. If that small lot residential subdivision was going in and it was over 5 lots, then it would require this 20-foot buffer around it. Or on the edges where it shared a boundary, a parcel boundary with rural
And
residential.
that's what I'm wondering, is if you can redraw that map and get an extra unit in there. Is that what like the idea is? It's like, oh yeah, well, 20 feet, now we can bump everything over and get another lot in there. Is that what happens or no?
No, it's the 20-foot buffer means you cannot build in that 20 feet. So it does shrink the buildable land down
Uh-huh.
a little bit, but that's, I guess, the trade-off for what they want to see as a mitigation measure for
Right.
higher density development going in next to lower
So
density.
that really restricts like any ADU stuff, because then you're getting buffers in the 20-foot buffer zones.
But not for, yeah, but that's true, but not for like, for those smaller infill possibilities. That's where you would benefit from not having to do the 20-foot buffer, and you could still fit in another. It's usually gonna be like a 2-lot subdivision, you're just taking one small parcel and breaking it in half.
Ooh, what supersede? Sorry, actually,
Yeah,
what supersedes the other with ADUs? The setbacks are more minimal if it meets, a specific set of specifications, right? Height and yada yada. Can that encroach in this buffer area?
No, I don't think so, I think that I think the
takes range.
buffer is basically like this 20-foot setback for the entire subdivision. So along the boundary where it shares adjacent to the lower density, wouldn't be around the entire subdivision, but it would be this kind of 20-foot strip of land that couldn't be developed in.
The plat's gonna read like that.
It would have to be on the plat, yeah. Be like an easement or something.
Common ground, not a part of the. Like you said, even, so it could be a part of it. The lot.
Maybe just a note for development stipulation on the plat.
Mhm.
With the John on.
Probably like a, yeah.
because then
Could
that
be.
buffer could be removed.
Or forgotten, more likely.
Mhm.
In 30
Probably.
years.
Flat, building envelope on the thing, and the 20 feet out. Something like that.
Mhm.
Somebody will find it.
I know, it's, originally we were like, let's just take it out completely, because it really just, it adds complication to our process and the plats and
It sounds like the
Enforcing it.
commission is.
still wanting to
they
have
wanna
it.
have it there.
Uh-huh.
Use space to build a highway.
Okay, why don't we then move on to the HDHO revisions?
Great, so we are moving along, making progress. It's a little slower, of course, than I had hoped, but the next time that you'll see this, it'll be at a public hearing at our next meeting, for sure. We hashed over these things, just way too much by now. And so, but we did have some good progress at the last commission meeting in getting some consensus around those last eligibility requirements that we were kind of toying with changing and revising. So the one involving self-employed workers, that was quite a lengthy discussion with the commission. Ultimately, I presented what the planning commission had proposed as some options for changing that. And what they ended up settling on was keeping the 75% of the clients needing to be local, but then offering this other option if they weren't able to prove that they would be, that they could provide proof of at least 5 years of residency within the 84532 zip code and verification of income. And what we haven't figured out yet is I haven't gotten to the bottom of what the income threshold would be. So it's a pretty big change to introduce an income cap for one of the eligibility requirements into HDHO, because that was never really the idea, was to have an income cap, but I guess this was kind of one of the workarounds that they felt good about if we were gonna revise anything with the self-employed requirement, because the commissioner was still very, concerned that a self-employed worker could really skew the market the market for locals for housing, so having that income cap was kind of their solution to that.
And the income cap only applies if they don't meet the 75%.
Right, if they can't prove it, if they can't prove that, or there's some inability to have that, meet that requirement.
Okay.
Mhm. So that was interesting, and then, we
We don't know
also,
what that number is gonna be yet, though, I just want to clarify.
yeah, I think we were
Yeah.
trying to figure out some kind of like median,
Yeah,
something based on the median.
that's a demographic based.
Yeah,
Percentage of median household income.
right, something like that.
Do you all have comments about that I can carry on, or do you have any comments about it?
Doesn't really feel like it is following the nature of the like initial intention of the HDHO.
You do feel that way?
I feel like it does not, that's kind of outside of the initial intention of the HDHO.
Yeah, I feel like the HDHO is supposed to be this kind of a free market approach with no income caps, like income caps do weird things to a market, and like the kind of the genius of it didn't have that,
I mean, like, regardless of if we want to,
it allows, it allows people to still have a stepping stone into real estate. In a protected pool. I don't know, that one to me is, just kind of.
I have this awful legal thought. Is it okay to have all of a sudden an affordable housing type piece of legislation in allowing people to move into houses when I think we've been told we aren't able to do that with kind of affordable housing stuff? Is that,
Well,
how does it work?
the state statute allows you a jurisdiction to require a certain amount of affordable income restricted housing if you provide an incentive, which the HDHO is an
Okay.
incentive program. So it
So that's
is
the way that,
built
okay.
into it. So I don't think that would be. The only thing that I think could be a legal question is that the fact that this is going retroactively.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that seems like a big deal.
It's opening up the pool. It's providing a different way to become eligible. So, and it's, in that sense, it's, these revisions are all working towards not making it more restrictive,
Mhm.
but making it more open, actually.
It feels like,
Yeah.
because it's, this is saying, my understanding of reading this is saying, so you can qualify for 75% or
Yeah.
you qualify with 5 years within 8542, whatever, okay, so they're wrong, but and an income verification. Is there a reason that the 5 years isn't enough for us at this point? It seems like
Is it an
incredible
and
overkill,
or?
and it's not, like I'm saying, it does
I think
not.
they're,
it's
again,
not
they
within
were very concerned, and maybe Tricia, if you correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression was that the concern here was with self-employed workers that might be, if their clients are all not local, and we can't verify that they're not
Yeah.
local, then they could be, really, their income could be much, much higher than
Right.
typical workforce.
Yeah. Yeah, if my memory serves me, it was, Kevin giving an example of, somebody coming out of Silicon Valley that's, making $500,000 a year, right? And they're
They're not
living,
gonna- They're not gonna live in HDHO either.
you don't know
Well,
that.
Even if they were though, Trish, they'd still have to live here for 5 years
Mm.
before they could even live. They'd have to have been here for.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
I was just asking for input. I'm not debating it.
Oh,
This
no,
was
I'm not, yeah.
something I brought up, but that's
Yeah.
my memory, is that there were those concerns. And I see Mike there. Mike, do you remember Anything else about that discussion? That was just my memory.
No, the discussion wasn't a lot on the 84532 area code for
Yeah.
5 years. But the income cap wasn't everyone
Yeah, that was kind of a.
There's just a few concerns by, right?
on the income cap.
I also, if you insist, or if people want an income cap, it should be like close to the amount that it costs to, the income needed to pay a mortgage on a non-protected, on a normal house, which would be $200,000.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the income cap, and if that's gonna be a.
I was gonna say the same thing, Aaron, you're exactly right. Median household income in Grand County is $51,300. And so if that's where we're gonna start,
No, we can't.
I mean,
That's too low.
the family that has a median household income of $50,000 in Grand County after living here for 5 years needs dramatically more help than HDHO, for Christ's sake. Like, this is not.
Yeah.
Let's not act like this is solving any problems.
Yeah.
Well,
No,
the other thing with self-employment income is if you're looking at a net income with a certain type of a business after tax.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot of self-employment people, depending on the type of business, vary a lot of expenses into the company, and the net is small, even though the income is quite high. And so that's the other thing to consider. Is this a net or is it a gross income? And certain types of businesses are gonna have a very high gross income with a low net, I guess.
And I might add on that point is maybe taking a 3-year average, because a lot of these,
Yeah,
self-employed folks, I mean, it's boom and
Yeah.
bust. And so you have 1 year where you're scared to do too well.
Yeah.
That's a bummer. You lose your house if you did too well, and then the next year you flop.
So I guess my point is bringing income into the picture brings a lot of complexity.
No, I agree. I appreciate that. No, I just wanted a little bit more feedback from you guys, so I appreciate that.
I have a couple thoughts. I think this is like I look at this and it is an overall expansion, so I have, no room to complain on it. I think that's great. I would call it more of like a baby step in the right direction, but I understand there's, overall the commission is really tentative on this, since there have been some other factors in addition to what solely what developers are saying from their perspective, and I understand that needs to be balanced. One thing and I'll just voice this with the, something that just strikes me as being kind of a miss from what I believe was the original intention, was the remove ownership restriction for multifamily and apartment developments. So I think this comes into context when I've heard a particular commissioner talk multiple times about how this, we need this, and we need to adapt it to make it work for the Main Street cook is the term I've heard used over multiple meetings, multiple times. And I just to emphasize again what Tony was just saying, this HDHO is probably not for that demographic. It's that demographic is probably going to be using more of the affordable housing options and programs. So, looking at multifamily and apartment developments, like if we're wanting to keep wealth local, opening up the ownership to anybody for multifamily or apartment, it just seemed like a bizarre departure from that idea. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think we're moving on then to the Land Use Code Article 6.4 landscaping screening update. Jenna.
Ooh. So. Mr. Giving a little bit on this. It's not fully formed. This really is just kind of me taking advantage of the fact that we're getting together today. I've been tasked with starting to rewrite the landscape ordinance code, kind of not as a reaction, it was needed anyway, but in reaction to the state's incentivizing the sod buyback program, so landscape incentive program. I really do just have ultimately a rough outline started. You all are probably a lot more educated on them than I am. I'm learning as I go. So I do just kind of want to run through that outline a little bit with you. and see if you have some initial thoughts. Ultimately, the county would have to write a qualifying ordinance in order for any applicant to qualify for the sod buyback program. And so with that, upfront, you'll see at least the 3 minimum sections that need to be included in that ordinance, which I find very easy to implement, no problem at all. But with that, I think we should certainly do an overhaul of the very limited land use code section we have on landscaping. That text is the entirety of it. It doesn't, I think there's 2 additional graphics that talk about, specific types of plants to use and maybe one other item. So I think it's lacking quite a bit. And I initially feel that because I have applicants and developers calling me to ask, what is the depth of, application materials that's needed. So to me, that says it's not very clear, not very detailed, and we should be working on it. So let me start with. It is like, how do I get that so long?
You can go like up here and click on that. Oh, or just minimize your whole window, bring it down a little bit.
There we go. Okay. So again, you'll see there the 4 minimum items that are required to be included, which is no lawn on parking strips less than 6 feet and within new development. No more than 50% front yard and side yard, front, side, and rear yard can be landscaped in new residential development with some exclusions for smaller lots. And then in new commercial, industrial, and institutional and multifamily development, common areas where there is lawn can't exceed 20% for the full developed area. So I did include on your agenda summary just some key questions to consider. I think Lisa reminded me there was a brief discussion at maybe 2 meetings back where you did discuss a couple things you wanted to include. One of those was whether or not you wanted to have an approved planting list. If there maybe is some consensus there, again, I'm kind of still learning on that. I could put it together and have folks review that. With that question is, in rewriting this code, do we want to include everything in this code, or do we want to have a separate manual with these things that has, specifics from GWISA for water line requirements and control specifications that they have and planting lists, or do we want to include everything in the code? How much landscaping do we want to initiate? How much requirements? I've gotten some feedback just from other departments, and I feel like the initial response I get is, we're not gonna make this too difficult, is it? It shouldn't have too much requirement. So as far as comparing what we want to maybe the city of Moab or other cities I've been looking at, like Scottsdale, where do we want to draw that line with new development requirements? So, okay, let me just scroll down through my little list. I did include all of the sections that we already have listed in our landscape code. Obviously, purpose, applicability is a good question with new developments. How much we want to include and require for single family development. An ongoing question that we've kind of been kicking around in the office is as far as a change of commercial use that would require the review and approval of a business license. If you're making a change of use on a lot. Some examples I've seen would say that, if the use is getting changed to something that requires more parking that already exists, then that would trigger what's required. Other examples, of course, are if it triggers the use or need for a building permit, but that can be a little bit tricky. Sometimes you need building permits for an array of things. So that's a consideration as well. So I included those particular top questions of consideration in the agenda summary. Did anyone have anything like they just kind of want to throw out for ideas for those initially? As far as species list, does everyone feel like they're kind of on the same page as yes, they would or would not want me to include that? Or make reference?
In some way, their reference or list, but I think my only suggestion would be Cara Dorrand in town, who runs Rem to Rem. She does native plant restoration.
What was her name?
Cara Dorrand, I can also send you her email or her information email. She would be a really good person because I know she consulted for the Salt Lake, the strip thing they did with the strip thing. She consulted with them about species and stuff, so
Okay.
should be a really good resource.
That'd be awesome.
And then also just looking at Tucson, it's kind of, it's pretty progressive.
Yeah, actually, Mikkel directed me
Cool.
there, so
Yeah.
I've been looking at that.
I would second that recommendation for Cara. She does rim to rim restoration. She also does the native plant thing that, not Holyoke, but one of those streets she goes down. Yeah.
And I wonder too if there might be some, NPO government partnership, like incentive partnership program. May not be codified in here, but I like if we have an incentive-based program to, for these, use these approved species.
Oh, yeah, like a resource.
Maybe she has some access money, to a grant that.
That would
pool of
be-
people who apply to that.
A moment to loop in, Izzy Weinhold, the county weed, not just weed supervisor. She already has the statutory authority to give out vouchers. Take out your bad plants, the county will buy you good plants. She already has, she cuts checks like that all the time. So talk to Izzy about that. I would recommend having a manual or an operations plan or some sort of keep the code simple. And then, so, because 6 out of 7 of those people don't want to read this. And so, keep it simple, get it approved and put it in a manual, because there's a lot of ground to be made here inside a manual. I would also, the general thinking on resilient landscape design. We should look to the southwest as aerification intensifies, it spreads. We're planting species that we're finding in the Gila River Valley, in Escalante. To plan for that kind of migration of species is a good way to look at it. That gets our landscaping ahead of the curve as far as water resiliency is concerned. So cities like Tucson, cities like St. George, even shudder to think about it, Las Vegas. But that's what we're talking about at DNR these days, is looking southwest when we look at the vegetals there.
Great. Thanks. The idea Jenna had about the manual, the benefit of having a manual that you would need to follow, it would be part of the requirement, but that you could update the manual more easily instead of having to go in and amend the code every time there was
Yeah.
a minor tweak that you needed to make. And so I think that would be a nice way to set it up.
I wonder if it's easier to make an exclusion list like a noxious weed than a.
That's how
Well,
it's
we have
existing already.
we have a county noxious weed list, and that's an entirely separate
Right.
board, but there's also, I agree with you, there's species that, noxious in the natural resource world usually implies bad for agriculture or stock. And bad for our purposes here in resilient landscaping doesn't mean something totally different.
Well, yeah, and then the gap between noxious and native is also there's a lot of
Yeah.
plants that drink a ton of water. And
That are
they're
native.
if you're planting something from, on that too, but I'm also
Yeah.
talking about in that gap.
Yeah, totally.
I just have, I totally get all that. I just see it as when you're landscaping something, your front yard is open to criticism of all your neighbors. And what a way to weaponize a fight, right? Oh, well, she doesn't have let's see, this Texas red tip. She has that in your yard, so I'm gonna call it a complaint. That's how people operate. I'm just kind of I mean, as a plumber, I can, I bet you 3/4 of the county does not have backflow preventers. That would be a maintenance problem, right? They're out of compliance. I just see that we're gonna put a lot of people in a code violation, instantly, half the counties in
It
code
wouldn't be
violation.
retroactive, it would be for new development and changes of use.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so have a person that does have, is missing a backflow preventer or,
Currently,
Yeah.
well, we're not, if it's existing, it's historical.
Yeah.
It wouldn't. be
so it's only
compliance.
for new, okay.
Only for new, yeah.
Well, this is only if you opt into this program.
Well,
You
that's,
opt into the buyback.
that's for the existing, for existing development, if you have a yard and
Yeah.
already, and then you want to get a little bit rebate from this program, you can opt into it, but for new development, they would be required to go through and meet all these new these new standards.
Yeah, I just meant like in what Aaron's talking about, where somebody's like re-landscaping their yard.
Right. Oh.
So like when you're re-landscaping, are you going to like fall within this or like every house after 2023 is like
Yeah.
now in these set of rules and before it's like, it's just seems really confusing. Like,
We can
I just
consider
put
that.
AstroTurf in my front yard and the county or the city banned it. And I'm like,
Well, if
oops.
you're
like,
re-landscaping, that's like a new project. It's
Yeah.
a change of what you've had. So I could consider, I'll look at, maybe there's gotta be some sample language on, re-landscaping and falling into compliance
Right.
with the code for landscaping.
Now do I have to pull a building permit for landscaping?
No,
You know,
but
that's all this kind
that's
of
a good point.
questions.
Yeah, I don't know, that could get. a
Like,
little sticky.
honestly, my knee-gut reaction, like, you want me to pull a permit to landscape? Like,
No.
okay, I get it, we're getting drier, I mean, like, I can understand, I can see a lot of people being like, no way, you know?
I wonder if, the incentive program would incentivize them to follow.
Yeah,
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 because I believe the number was something between $1 and $3 a square yard for buyback, so it's
Yeah.
not bad.
okay,
Um,
sorry, I just
no,
wanted
it's
to
great.
throw
I'll put
that
it
kind
in
of
there.
cantankerous, like, I know how I do, even though I try to be like current thinking, but.
Yeah, the new standards that would be put in here would be triggered when somebody applies for a subdivision application, so we would want to see what their landscaping plan is. Or a building permit for residents, or building permit for a commercial development or a multifamily development, then that always comes with a site plan anyway. We require that to see what the setbacks are and where the building is and the setbacks. So I think that would be the time when you would also have like a supplementary landscaping plan that would go with it. And so we'd be reviewing that.
So that's kind of a great tie into one of my major questions is, to what level do we want a new single family dwelling to meet a landscape code? Do we want to keep it simple, something like, no more than such and such percentage can be turf, the rest, all your planting, has to be on the native plant list? I wasn't really sure how far to go for a single family dwelling. I feel like commercial and industrial is a little easier.
I think really, if we're trying to dial in on water conservation, the difference between, and Ken is right, there's a vast gap between a noxious plant, exotic turf, tomatoes, and sand drop seed, right? But it's really the density of the way you plant what you have, whatever it is, at whatever level of density is going to drive the water conservation bell curve much more than the kind of species, right? You
Are you
could,
alluding to like the water hydro zones? Like
yes,
planting hydro zones?
exactly.
Okay.
How you zone and how you landscape things with non-water consumptive or water saving materials like mulch and permeable cover and gravel is much more important in water conservation than like what kind of native grass did you have, or did you, is it 20% fescue and then the rest of it is, a strawberry patch? That's like, it's really the density of vegetative cover compared to other non-water consumptive water saving materials that really helps conserve water. We want shade, we want decomposition, right? And we like hike around out in sand flats. It's not just Jeeps that made all those plants go away. There are just not a lot of plants in the desert to begin with, right?
So kind of on the line of the water budget and hydro zones, on hydro zones. Moab has done their draft of their landscaping plan, and it is quite detailed and includes a lot of detail required for a water budget. Is that something we want to consider? I mean, it's quite in depth, or do we maybe not want to do that? We can also come back to that element of the conversation. I can write in a section, we could look at it and then see if it's a little bit too much or if it's something that might work.
I'm gonna throw out my very last comment, guys. I promise.
Don't let it be your last comment.
My big picture is that if we're going to continue to have negotiation and discussion with San Juan County and the Division of Water Rights and all of these conversations that water matters to us, we better act like it. That's what a good faith negotiation looks like. And so like, let's put our money where our mouth is when we wave our finger at Bruce Adams, and we know San Juan County is coming to take our water. What are we gonna do with it?
I also wonder, like, you know, as somebody that installs irrigation systems and stuff, it's like, oh, like, what kind of training are we, like, when you're talking about a water budget, it's like, I'm gonna sit there and be like, put a meter on, you know, like, I kind of talked to, like, some other people in the city, and it's like, kind of need to bring the people that are installing these things into the conversation about like, oh, is that even possible here? I don't know. I'll just throw that in there because it's like, yeah, you want me to put like I have to buy a $2,000 tool, like, you know, I got like a shovel, you know, I work for $20 an hour on the weekends to install your landscaping kind of guy, you know, like, you just.
Make sure Ed Stone can do it.
Yeah.
I love it. He's my guy. For the record,
Yeah.
I will only go there, but.
You squint,
Make
sometimes
sure.
you get you guys confused.
Yeah, no, I hear your point though.
Yeah, just.
Keep it simple and to the point where it can be implemented without burdening property owners.
Right, and we have like these awesome workshops with stuff, and it's like, you know, you guys in the landscape, or people in the landscaping are like, oh, we're not supposed to plant that, or what do we think? I don't know. That's, you know, we do workshops and stuff.
Yeah.
Is this something that we wanna get all the landscapers together and be like,
It would be great.
what do you guys think? You know, like, just put gravel everywhere or what, you know?
I mean,
mean,
probably a really good resource is probably Roz McCann, Roz Brain at Utah State. She's a sustainability professor there, and she has a lot of this in place, right? So it might be just great just to pull her in.
And even if we could find a model to work off of, like somebody mentioned Scottsdale or.
Yeah, Jen has been collecting some
Yeah.
Right.
example ordinances. I think.
So I've been working with, looking at the cities, Scottsdale, Apache Junction, Pima, a model ordinance of hazard planning for landscaping, Hyde Park, Tucson, and Las Vegas. I just got it today.
Did Washington County have one, or maybe it was St. George that
I
had
didn't
it?
get that far yet.
Okay, they would be a good one. I know they have
Has
some,
Cedar City put anything together yet? I know that they might have been,
seems like they would have,
fast
since
reaction
they
to
have
it,
their, yeah, their big water.
Yeah, their water's not in good shape.
Yeah.
Their aquifer isn't.
So as far as application materials, I feel like that's a fairly easy portion of it. Required materials for submittal, I think that's pretty easy, something RF has been put together based on feasibility there. Irrigation, like I said, I'm working with Ben Musselman at GWISA to kind of make sure that all comes together as required, and is feasible. So I'll have some discussions there before we finalize that. In regards to the pressure lines, controllers, check valves, backflow preventers, and etc. We did talk a little bit there on my water budget question. And then the final section is just details of this middle requirements. Let's see if anything else pops up. Not a good. This last section is just something, if it was chosen that we wanted to do like a specifications manual, I wanted to kind of include, kind of to Aaron's point, a little bit more of fun education to include as a section, maybe, you know, a separate chapter in the back on just some additional education and best practices. So that is just kind of what I'm putting together so far. What I would say is, because this is a really rough draft looking at it, if you, as you have ideas, please email them to us at planning. Learning a lot as I go, so I appreciate all of your thoughts.
Do you have,
Jen, yeah.
do you have any interest, or would you like to share this with us as like even like a view only copy or something like that, so we can like send you those comments and reference this? And then also, I'm sure you're aware of this, but USU has all of those like great resources about like how much to water, when to water, everything specifically for
How
Moab.
I pulled this last section from, it might have been.
I would assume so.
Okay.
It's like a pretty.
I'll look at that for sure. Okay, so I'll send that out.
Yeah,
cleaner copy
I
after.
didn't, maybe the last comment was exactly what I was gonna make, didn't quite hear. If you have those different cities,
Mhm.
and of course, the Moab water plan, if you could send us out links to
Yeah.
them.
I'll have them
Yeah,
actually,
that would be very,
the links right at the top of
helpful.
the document for you,
but
so.
I don't know a great deal about the landscaping. I do know a lot of people say you don't want to just pave everything over, of course, because it makes the area hotter.
Right.
And the question is, how much vegetation? I saw some neat places in Moab that had lots of rocks and 3 or 4 trees in their front yard that looked like they'd be cool, but I don't know what the right mixture is.
Right.
I know
So
the
there must be
city's,
info out there.
pretty sure the city's ordinance right now, that language includes a requirement for minimum landscaping that to prevent
Mhm.
that from just being like a gravel filled with lawn or, sorry, front yard.
The other thing, when you talk about irrigation in terms of like Kent's Lake water. Now, I think we're kind of in consensus that the problem really is the aquifer, the Glen Canyon aquifer. Like, when Kent's Lake water. Like, it isn't as important because it's, like a the valley fill aquifer. So let's say at the subdivision, they have a Kent's Lake water right that's like massive. It's like, well, they're not using culinary aquifer water. Is it okay to like blast irrigation water on it kind of thing? I'm like, it is cool, you know. For a strip of grass, you have cooler settings. I think that is a thing to look at. Maybe as a set, you know, then it gets all complicated. It's like, oh, you know, why do they have a yard? Well, they have like an acre foot of, you know, and they have a water share. So.
Yeah.
You know,
And you need a certain amount of water flowing out if you're gonna have the Matheson wetlands
yeah.
survive. So, I mean, it is a complex issue.
Why I'm emphasizing that, like, we build the Garden of Eden before we get to the Matheson wetlands. You know, if you look at the old historic photos of this entire valley, it wasn't that green. You know, this is an alluvial fan in an arid desert landscape. There was a riparian corridor along Mill and Pack Creeks. But today it's probably the greenest that the greater Moab Valley has ever been. So let's think about that. You know, there's not, we're talking about this today with our restoration ecologist, like cottonwoods really only showed up a couple of places. You know, they're picky, they're delicate. You don't. We're not gonna green the West.
They like their feet in water.
The water that was already there. The water that we put there, water that's already there.
I was reading the, what we have currently is for the landscape and screening
Mhm.
section. It seemed largely, if not entirely, commercial. Am I just reading, maybe I'm just reading that wrong, or I see multifamily and, and non-residential.
There is several places within the land use code that require the screening from protected zone districts, for example, the ADO currently. You have to protect it from anything RR protected zone districts, the commercial crossover, obviously. What else pops in my head? There's a couple sections that pop up, so anywhere that would require the buffer or screening would be that. But I didn't even include that because I anticipate kind of an overhaul of that section, so I didn't even start drafting it yet. I really
Okay.
wanted to get the bulk of the landscaping portion set. I figured the screening would kind of write itself,
Okay,
yeah.
The landscaping, I think you're right, it doesn't seem like.
it's very much focused on non-residential.
It says this section shall apply to all multifamily and non-residential development. Provided that wind finance company. Blah, blah, blah. That's interesting. Yeah, it seems more focused on.
And so I guess I'm just kind of trying to look at this or get an understanding of it at a root level, what's happening here, like, is the plan to revise like entirely and add, or just kind of add and just keep what we
I'm
have?
ultimately gonna scrap what we have there.
Scrap
Yeah,
that,
I'll
okay.
use a lot of what's included in there, but it's so short. I was just having a better time starting with a fresh outline and including 3 excerpts from other codes. So I was really just gonna scrap it. It was looking too messy copying this and then just editing through it. It was literally just all X'd out. So
Sorry, Jenna, just for curiosity's sake, when was the last time we revised 6.4? All right, it's like this built with, 2010 rationale, 1980 rationale.
Couldn't tell you off the top of my head today.
Gotcha.
Whenever the
Yeah.
planning commission made decisions. It says in here, the planning commission can approve.
Gotcha.
Oh, this is really.
So yeah, that's all I'm saying is like we could, I mean, entirely scrapping this thing from the start and starting over might not be a bad idea. This was made using science in 1980.
I think if it was any lengthier than it is now, I might try to rewrite what's there, but it's like a page. It's, there's nothing there. Okay, I will send out the materials for everyone and please send me comments back. I appreciate at least your initial thoughts. I was obviously overwhelmed when I started it. This is something I'm new to, so it's really interesting. So I appreciate it. Thanks again.
And I throw, sorry,
No problem.
close it, I have one. Afterthought.
Shoot.
I throw this out there, it's kind of half baked. But as you're getting into like the more like the commercial side of things for new business or, new business coming in, I think absolutely let's, hold the highest standard of what we want. But just in looking at the spirit of like, if a, let's say business wants to expand or exceed 25% of the existing floor area.
Include like another. Go ahead.
What I'm getting at is if we can find that delicate balance of,
Mhm.
because if there's a currently existing business. They don't have to change anything until they wanted to either change their use or I was reading that 25%, if they wanted to expand by a certain amount, I'm thinking like a substantial change that maybe they would be. Then they'd be non-compliant, so then they'd have to come into code with this, and so I wonder if there's. What I would be worried about seeing is like, there's a business, local business has an opportunity to grow and expand for themselves and for their staff and employees. But what's holding them back would be a really expensive landscaping change.
Mhm.
And so they're like, well, we can't expand until we come into compliance here, and that's gonna negate any sort of expansion. And I just wonder if there's anything we could do to
To make the
leverage.
delicate balance. just
Yeah,
like
to
you
find a
said.
delicate
No, yeah,
balance,
it's
yeah.
tops on my mind. I've
But-
seen that play out in a really funky way in a previous place that I lived with a giant mall, and they wanted to expand or change use, but they would have had to redo the entire parking lot, which obviously is ginormous.
Mhm.
Prevented expansion or redevelopment or even, making it up to compliance or nice in any way. So that's tops on my
And
mind
at
to
the
pay
same-
attention to.
At the same time, we live in a society that is changing. We need to.
There's a balance. I'm
You
sure.
bond them.
Sorry.
You bond them, put them on a 10-year bond, so you will get it done eventually. Allow them to do this.
It's included as an option in one of the,
Mm.
absolutely,
Bond.
okay.
It's easy.
If it reaches a particular threshold, okay. That's a good thought, I'll bet there a little bit.
The 25% is not a bad number. If you're gonna invest that, you're gonna make a pretty big investment anyway.
Mhm.
I agree that applicability section's an important section. And I guess applicability may be different depending on the use to commercial versus. We talked about, would it even apply to single family?
Yeah, that's my concern with that. I think maybe only, I don't even want to speak out of turn yet. Haven't looked enough to think about that. Certainly new development, but as far as. New building permit for expansion, I want a new room or a new garage, how much square footage is that adding?
Does the planning department have expendable funds to like hire, feasibility study on that, like pay a consultant? Cause I guess this is a recurring thought I have is, well, we want to get input from, from developers, from builders, from contractors. Like, yeah, but that's their time, like, you can only do so much public service before you're like, okay, like I gotta black out all the noise that's going around me. I can't contribute on this one, because.
Yeah, there could be,
So,
there could be. I
'cause
mean,
I would think, oh, sorry, to cut you off.
if not this year, maybe next week, the budget for next year, but there's a possibility for them, for a feasibility, a small feasibility study around the landscaping stuff.
Like, what are the actual costs associated with this?
Yeah, that'd be great.
I mean, a good hard shot at it before we spend money though.
It's all right. It's all on your shoulders.
I see you just kind of need landscape architects more and more for stuff, instead of just like, hey, I plant that one.
Yeah, but for a small commercial project, you had to go out and,
Yeah.
that'd be,
Celebrate.
you know, for
Tumbleweed farm.
for that little HOA that I live in, we have a 1-year requirement after CO, that landscaping has to be complete.
Lots of examples I saw that you can't even get your CO until the landscaping is
See, that would
complete, but
be,
our growing season is different.
that'd be hard to do,
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
the seasonal issues, and then the other thing is you really can't landscape until everything is done because contractors trash the landscaping, so.
Right.
Yeah, you're basically gonna delay the move-in of somebody by probably 60 or
Yeah, we
so
don't wanna do
days.
that. You wanna be able to move in and then figure out your landscaping.
Yeah, but then how's the enforcement, right? Like,
Yeah.
we
Well,
have
you
more
do
site
develop.
visits by us.
A lot of St. George's, HOAs run on the plan, or the CO on approved, landscape plan.
Right.
And then the year completed,
Yeah,
Year to put it in, a year
I-
to install it,
built
yeah,
and lived down there. So
right.
yeah, it's the same with that little one we have here. It's the same deal, landscaping has to be approved, but then you have 1 year.
Yeah.
And we take a deposit too. I think that's actually pretty common.
Oh, good, thanks, well, thank you.
So much, thank you.
Future land use plan progress,
All right.
should be an upbeat one.
Yeah, it's just a quick update, just to keep things moving in this direction of we're picking this back up, with all the land use code amendments I've been working on. I have to say, haven't really been able to focus much on, the future land use plan, but I have started to revise the scenario maps and, trying to come up with a final kind of culmination of what we got from all of the public workshops and the input from the planning commission. And so we did schedule a steering committee meeting on September 20th. So my goal is to have a full, update for that committee to see what the progress is on the map and on the actual chapter of the general plan and updating the language. And then the next step I would think is, something I've been thinking about working on actually concurrently to support this effort is possibly contracting out some work to get the visual architectural renderings of some of these future land use ideas that we have that we've come up with, especially around the multifamily districts and then mixed use neighborhood commercial. I think we should try to incorporate some visual aids to kind of convey what this form would look like, and maybe even trying to create some standards that would tie to the visual aids. So that's something I'm thinking about putting together requests for proposals and see if we can get some of that work done. But yeah, September 20th, we'll have that land use steering committee meeting, and then we'll bring the results from that to planning commission. Anybody have any questions on that?
Okay. Tell me I can do this. It isn't quite 6 o'clock. But maybe citizens to be heard. At this point, if there are any citizens to be heard on a topic that's not on the agenda, and then we'll go into a public hearing. Any online? Mike, you wanna,
as a citizen, yes, sorry.
you got the
I'm
tape.
very sorry I was late. I don't know if it was on the agenda. I wanted clarification. I hear that our land use code still stipulates, or it does stipulate that it has to be a workforce housing primary residence on the, I think what it is,
For the ADO?
for the ADO developments. I hear that that was already in there, and it wasn't during, or it just wasn't shown in the commission meeting.
Mhm.
And I was wondering if that is true or
We did have that discussion kind of earlier in the meeting. No, it's okay. When we were doing Trish was giving the update from the county commission. And so essentially what we came to understand is that there was an earlier draft of the ADO code that included some language for an occupancy requirement for locally employed. But that language was removed at some point from planning commission to county commission. By the time the final version got adopted, it wasn't a clear explicit requirement for local workforce occupancy. But there is an effort to try to possibly integrate that language back into the code with the consent of the property owners that have already gotten approval for the ADO. There's only 3 of those. And then also with the consent of the ones who are in process right now. And that's really just going to come down to kind of a legality of how to do that. And so staff has forwarded that request to the attorney's office on, a path forward for implementing this change, and just basically asking for the legal guidance of whether or not we can do that. And that it'll be on the commission's agenda tomorrow.
Figured it would.
Yeah.
That's why I'm here.
Great, okay. Then I guess we are going into a public hearing now. And is a hearing to consider an ordinance to amend the land use code section 3.3.2 accessory uses.
Okay. So we finally have before us, so I guess the planning commission did see this land use code update as a public hearing back in 2022, but it included a whole bunch of other sections and a bunch of other revisions that were not necessarily related to accessory uses. We had like the temporary use permit section and a whole update to Article 10 that was grouped together. So we've taken those things out because they're a little bit a bigger undertaking, and those things were kind of holding up the really basic update here that you see in the packet, which is just to bring the section of ADUs up to be consistent with up to date with Utah state statute. In terms of defining what an internal ADU is and distinguishing that between that and an external ADU. And then we're also including clarification on how to measure the dimension of an ADU, and that the max square feet is 1,200 square feet as measured from the external wall. We're also proposing in this update a reduced setback for ADUs if their wall height does not exceed 10 feet. Exterior wall height. And the other kind of item up for discussion that we have been kind of going back and forth on at planning commission meetings is whether or not we should be restricting ADUs for, well, one idea was restricting them for occupancy to workforce, but I think that was taken off the table. But there was this language in the original version that we were looking to adopt, which it would have required ADUs to be occupied by a primary resident or the owner, basically, of the property. And that actually was not it's not written in our code now. So I think what we were getting confused with is that requirement only kicks in from the building permit side if the ADU is being built by the owner. If it's an owner builder, then it does have to be occupied. One of the units has to be occupied by the owner. But that's only the building code requirement. It's not in our land use code. So I guess in this draft, I'm proposing that we don't add that in as an extra requirement because we don't currently require it as we thought we did. So the occupancy requirements would simply be just to say that ADUs, shall not be condominiumized or sold separately. And where an ADU exists, neither the primary nor the secondary dwelling unit shall be occupied for less than 30 consecutive days. And that ADUs shall not be used as overnight accommodations. And these are all things that are actually already required, but it would just be, including that into the very explicit into the code so that it can't be misinterpreted. So, does anybody have any questions on the changes here or any concerns?
Do we open the hearing before we
Oh,
talk, or do we talk?
thank you. Yeah, should we go ahead and open the hearing?
I think I did.
You open, I mean, to public comment, right, doing?
Oh, yes, I did very
Which
good.
one's first?
Yes. Is there any
Wow.
public comment on this proposal, on this ordinance? Okay, I'm going to guess there isn't. If there is, you should just interrupt us, turn yourself on and interrupt. Okay, now we're ready for discussion.
Well, don't we have to have a motion?
Somebody have that.
Oh, we do need a motion.
I will move to forward a favorable or unfavorable recommendation to the commission to approve the ordinance amending section 3.3.2. Accessory uses. I have one point of discussion. This is all either very technical or prescribed by the state legislature, correct?
We need a second first.
Second.
Oh, we need a second, right? This is just- Thank you. This is all, thank you, Michaela. Sorry. I forgot about the second. But yeah, this is all either stuff prescribed by the state legislature or stuff that gets like really myopic in Bill Hulse's world about how high things need to be, correct?
Yeah, I mean, and we were trying to kind of, wherever we could, provide a little bit more of a relaxation of
Yeah.
the,
I
so
think
that to encourage ADU.
that was a sincere
construction. Yeah.
I like it. I just want
So when you made your motion, I think you said favorable or unfavorable.
unfavorable.
Okay.
Guys, this is like, this was just the lever pulling part. Let's- Yeah, I did. This is, so,
Yes, it is. It's really, the reason for this, the purpose originally was just to bring it up to state statute, to be consistent with that. And then we were just finding little things that, that needed clarification and better written language, I guess.
And I have one comment on writing, but I have another question, which is, aren't we a long way past when the state said we should have
Probably.
this?
yes.
And they didn't do anything, do they? They just kind of figure it's gonna happen.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've always wondered
because
that.
like Castle Valley kind of panicked and did it, I don't know, a year and a half ago.
Yeah,
So we wouldn't get in trouble, but now I'm gonna tell them to relax. So, and this is very minor, but might as well do it. Page 32. Section 3.3.2A5. The minimum side and rear yard setbacks for the accessory structures shall be 5. And it's got the foot mark, and then it's got feet, so feet should be taken out of there. And that makes sense because then it says if the structure's wall height is 10.
oh, good,
Yeah,
yeah,
so
for consistency.
just to drop
Yeah,
it.
definitely, I'll strike that.
But I thought it was quite well done.
That looks great.
Yeah, it seems tight and tidy.
Yeah, I should mention that the one point of legal clarification that we're still waiting to hear from the attorney's office on is whether or not we can limit a property to having only one ADU. So right now, as it's written, we would like to be able to say an internal ADU or an external ADU may be permitted per one or the other per parcel, but not both.
Always gotta have it.
So that was something that we've gone back and forth on, and, I don't think the state's legislators intended for a jurisdiction to have to approve 3 dwelling units on a parcel. But the way that it's written, it's meant to basically open up the possibility for ADUs in places where they restrict them completely, like out in northern Utah communities, but where we already permit ADUs anywhere in all zones, it kind of creates this little misinterpretation of what the intention was, though.
I thought my understanding was that we like had to allow internal ADUs.
Right.
Is that what we're trying to clarify? So we think
That's
that
what we're
not
trying to
sure.
clarify. In the case that there's already an existing ADU on the property, can we say no to an internal ADU? So that may end up changing in the final draft that we bring to the commission. I didn't want to wait on this any longer, and we haven't heard back from the attorney's office. I know they're super busy and they are understaffed, so
I guess my question would be, what would be the reason to deny somebody
an internal ADU
or just having, if they wanted to do an internal
and an
and an
external.
external, like, is there?
Well,
Yeah.
just because when you're thinking about a single family dwelling, the intention of a single parcel in a rural residential zone, especially, you have one primary dwelling and then you're allowed to have your accessory dwelling. And so it's 2 families max that you're thinking. And when you go beyond that, you're kind of almost looking at like a multifamily property when you go to 3 families on one parcel. I think that was the concern.
So, jumping in with a quick comment, and I apologize, I lost my service. I'm on my phone now. The one thing I'd maybe just call out that could be included in staff notes when the commission discusses this is that in many of the conversations that the county commission has had related to other housing policies, like, for example, density bonuses, I've heard several commissioners point to ADUs as a more appropriate mechanism for increasing density or making, more supply available in our housing stock, and completely hearing that consideration of finding that delicate balance between ADUs as a policy device and ADUs as sort of a backdoor to density. The benefit that ADUs provide, depending on how the language, nets out in terms of occupancy, or residency requirements for ADUs. If we have the ability to add an ADU to a duplex, but require that the primary resident of the owner, be one of those 3 units, I wonder if the commission would consider multiple ADUs on a property with something like that as well. Again, as a way of increasing supply in a more manageable way for housing that is dedicated for people who live and work here. So that would be the only comment I'd add there. And Makeda, I shared your understanding of requiring the ability to add an internal ADU, just regardless of whether or not an external ADU is on the property. So I'm curious to see where that lands.
Yeah.
So as I understand it right now, Stephen's still looking into this for us, and he's gonna answer the question that he was asked, not the questions we're asking right now. So we should probably, if we have any sort of like, we need to change the question we're asking legal, we should probably not forward this motion that I have on the table.
I mean, I think the question that Emily, if I understand it correctly, that she's putting out there is, regardless of the legal opinion, would the county want to allow for an internal ADU, an external ADU, in addition to the principal dwelling?
Maybe we have to.
Then you wouldn't
allow
need
it
a legal
according to what
opinion.
legal says, right? Like, we'll come back to
So,
that.
yeah,
Right.
just to clarify, number one, there is a legal question of whether or not we could deny a internal ADU if an external ADU is on the property. That's the question I understand that Stephen is looking into. My
Correct.
follow-up, which is more of a policy question that I would be curious for the commission to consider, is do we want to deny somebody from having an additional ADU on their property if we were able to require that one of the units on that property, if there were 2 ADUs, would be the primary residence of the owner? Because that would be similar in you know, for all intents and purposes, that would be similar in effect to somebody having a duplex and adding an ADU. And I just am saying it from the perspective that I hear the commission continually point to ADUs as the most viable mechanism of increasing housing supply for our local workforce and local residences compared to things like density bonuses or even ADOs. And so if that's indeed something that the commission thinks is the best viable path, I'd love to see them maybe at least debate that. And I don't know if that needs to be an amendment to the motion or just something that could be included in staff notes, but I do think it's something I'd love to recommend that the commission at least consider for discussion.
Thanks, Emily. When you said commission the first time, I thought you meant planning commission, and so I was like, I don't know how to answer you.
Yeah, I don't talk about us in the third party when we're on our meetings. But no, thank you for clarifying. I appreciate it, Tony.
So do we want to pass this motion, understanding that legal will have something to say? And say we have a question for the commission about whether they'd actually like to allow 3.
Yeah, I think your motion could be amended to say that that language is subject to change based on the feedback from the commission. I don't know how you want to word that.
I feel good voting as long as there's a staff note about this. Bring it up.
Okay, so we're gonna vote on the motion and then ask for a staff note on this, right?
Advocate for it.
I'm confused over the whole thing with the duplexes. Why an owner occupier has to be involved in living on site. We've kind of struck that from the other ADU thing, right? Like,
Right.
so like, why is it on the duplexes
I
now?
think it's just this idea that it's going beyond the threshold of maybe what's reasonable to have an absentee landlord.
Okay, so it's only okay if there's that, like if the landlord's present. Is that what we're trying to do? Because then maybe it's
guess.
like, you can have an internal and external if you are a resident on that, but then, yeah, but
Yeah.
Hmm.
It's a question of, yeah, whether or not we would want to allow all 3 of the units on a property to be owned by somebody, but then all of them are being rented out. I mean, I guess it's a matter of opinion.
I just think it gets sticky with, if you sold the place. If you sold the duplex and then the next guy isn't an owner occupier, like, like how's that gonna,
It's a good point. It's a harder sale for sure. If you wanted to.
Yeah, and who's looking at that?
Occupancy was required, yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause then-
So,
that's a lot of capital that would be needed. I mean, that's a very valuable property. You have 2 rental incomes and your own home.
Yeah,
And we know that our buyer pool locally is
yeah, exactly.
local small and
Yeah.
To
I
add
just
color to my
feel-
comments, my suggestion is not to add language to that effect back into the draft or to debate it, you know, within this body. I think I've just heard this, like I said, I've just heard ADUs continue to be referenced as the preferred alternative to other policies by several members of the county commission. And knowing that they would have that policy device to potentially constrain, you know, would they be open to considering it versus what would be adopted otherwise, which is, you know, basically one shot and that's it. There may, I don't know. I don't want to overcomplicate things in our recommendation, but I continue to see us constraining, but also suggesting that there are other paths that make more sense. Since this is one that continues to come up as like, this makes sense as a way to increase housing supply. It just seems like I'd love for that discussion to be suggested as something the commission consider. So I think a staff note is sufficient to propel this forward.
Not an alternative motion. You'd be like, that's okay. Would anybody want an alternative motion that we take away the ownership on the 3? on the
Well, I
duplex?
actually have a question related to that. So duplexes could be owned individually. They must be owned together.
Well,
Can't they share a common
a
wall?
duplex is 2 units on 1 lot. And
Okay.
so the owner ultimately owns,
Both
both of
units.
those units.
Until they sell,
Huh?
until they sell.
Well,
Right.
twin home is what the definition of something on two different lots would be, right?
Right.
Townhome, I think it's a townhome actually.
Townhome.
Twin home and duplex are, according to our land use code, we've gone back and forth on this.
Oh,
but A
geez.
twin home and a duplex are the same thing and they are defined like that in our code. So it's a 2-unit dwelling. And it does not have a lot line in between it, so it shares the
That's
lot.
okay.
Yeah.
Home slash duplex.
Twin home slash duplexers.
So,
So there are, like the
Townhomes.
Arroyo Crossing, units are gonna be 2 owners in a twin home slash duplex.
Well,
Right.
no, there wouldn't be 2 owners unless you have tenants in common or something, but no.
that'd be
They
a
would-
townhome and
A
that.
townhome would have a parcel line, but they would share a wall. They would share a wall. It looked like a duplex essentially, but on the plat, there would actually be a parcel line.
Yeah.
On that shared wall, so it would be individual parcels. But for a duplex, it's
Slash
actually,
twin home,
no, that's,
duplex slash twin home, right?
the townhome is the one that has the.
The townhome is.
The parcel.
Lot line,
Townhome is.
I think
Townhome is the one that has the parcel boundary. in it.
It's confusing because community
Townhome drops
rebuilds
lots.
uses the language twin home
Mhm.
for their houses, they're split with a lot line down the middle.
Oh, right.
But I'm wondering if that's just their
I
like,
think it's just.
their
yeah,
like
everybody has
casual
a different
language, yeah.
Language
Yeah.
interpretation of twin home.
Yeah,
I like to kind of say duplex versus townhome.
but
In my
legally
mind,
in
that's
our
how I-
code, that's
Yeah,
how
what's
it's,
our
okay.
code?
So can
You
a
can't split a
duplex,
duplex.
And
can
you
a
can't split a
duplex be
duplex.
replatted into a townhome? Can a pair in?
Probably not gonna meet the law standards, the lot design standards to do that.
Might not,
I mean, you
yeah.
have to have a big zone.
Arroyo Crossing, those are duplexes.
They're townhomes in our code, but they're calling them.
Right, they don't on the line anyway, but when you're talking about ADUs,
Twin home is duplex,
There's-
just remember that.
yeah. When we're talking about the owner occupied ADU thing, and if there's gonna be one lot, that's a,
Twin home as opposed to.
Okay, well, with that,
that's a feedback.
What did you say? I think
That's
that's
what they-
fine.
Yeah.
Townhome is the opposite.
so at least, so I guess with that definition, that makes a lot more sense than to me.
So that, it basically means like the duplex it's like, those are 2 units. On
On the
one
same
parcel,
lot.
and then you would have an external ADU, which means there would be 3 dwelling units on one parcel. And we don't even really get into the possibility of an internal ADU inside of a duplex. But I don't know.
Yeah, should we, or is that something that needs to be investigated?
And that may
I
just
don't
be a
know if
question
the
for
fire-
building.
I don't
mean,
even know if
yeah, for
building code
fire,
would
yeah,
allow,
That's
I
just,
don't think building code allows, that's why I think it's not in there. Building code, I don't think allows an internal ADU in a duplex. I'm pretty sure that Bill has weighed in on this,
I can tell you.
because then it would turn it into a multifamily,
Mm,
it would be
three
a
or more
different
units.
kind of dwelling. Yeah,
So we do have a motion on the floor.
That was such a good, short procedural public hearing. My favorite half-hour long. short
Yeah.
procedural public hearing.
So are we ready to vote? Okay, so
Vote yes and let the commission sort it out.
well, and we're gonna then have a note on it. So, basically, I don't know, let's see, do I have the language here? I probably have, you have the language. You want to say the language?
Yeah, sure. I move forward a favorable recommendation to the county commission to approve the ordinance amending section 3.2.2 accessory uses. I believe it was seconded by Maketa.
Okay, how many are in favor?
Oh, sorry, I should have said with the staff note.
Yes, we will have the staff notes.
I vote aye. Yes.
Okay, it's unanimous. And then you know the staff note.
I've got it,
Yeah.
yeah.
Excellent.
Let's make sure it comes across
We will.
clearly.
See if they really want to do this by ADU.
If nothing else, the
okay.
ADU is like
We are-
the easiest permitting path forward ever, and building permit.
It is.
10 days and they can get going.
Yeah, it is a great path for getting housing on their own, like relatively quickly. So,
And increases density. Future considerations, any?
I don't have any.
It's the next.
Do we have a motion to end the meeting?
We'll move to adjourn.
Good, and
I'll second.
good. All in favor? Aye. Great.
Bye, y'all.
Bye all.
Right. Don't see some of you, everybody, dried apricots didn't dry out.
It's been a long time,
No,
but
like a month.
I- that's really